Welcome to our Al-Monitor Pro webinar with Her Excellency Ohood Khalfan Al Roumi, Minister of State for Government Development and the Future in the United Arab Emirates. I'm Andrew Parasiliti, President of Al-Monitor, and the Minister and I will be discussing the UAE's Projects of the 50, a series of developmental and economic projects that aim to accelerate the UAE's transformation into a hub in all sectors, including the economy, entrepreneurship, advanced skills, digital economy, space, and advanced technologies. Her Excellency Minister Al Roumi handles a unique and far-sighted ministerial portfolio focused on advancing government development, innovation, and future planning for the UAE. Minister Al Roumi previously held the position of Minister of State for Happiness and Well-Being, the first ever ministerial position of its kind in the world, introduced by the UAE government. She was also a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, and in 2017 was listed among the world's greatest leaders by Fortune magazine, making her the only Arab figure on that list. We are also joined today by two good friends of Al-Monitor in the UAE as discussants, Danny Sebright, the president of the US-UAE Business Council, our co-sponsor for the event today, and Afshin Molavi, a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and founder and editor of the Emerging Markets newsletter. For those of you who would like to submit questions, please do so via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. Minister Al Roumi, Your Excellency, welcome to our webinar today.
Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation. I'm really excited to be with you virtually among this distinguished guest, and I look forward for this interesting and engaging dialogue.
Thank you, and again, appreciate your joining us. Let's start with the why behind the Projects of the 50. Why is the UAE launching the projects at this time? Provide us with some background, and how is the timing linked to the UAE Golden Jubilee and the new national competitiveness model?
Thank you, Andrew. Just under 1 year ago, the UAE celebrated its Golden Jubilee. And it's a very important moment in our young nation. It was a moment to reflect on our journey and celebrate the many achievements that we had in the past 50 years. It was a remarkable 5 decades, to say the least. And I think we have certainly crossed many milestones and learned so many lessons during that journey. Today, the UAE ranks first in 156 global indicators. We are number one in infrastructure, in safety, in attracting talent. And I would like to share with you some figures and numbers about the UAE journey. So our international trade this year has passed the 1 trillion dirhams milestone, growing at 17% compared to 4% pre-pandemic. Our airports are among the busiest in the world, and we have welcomed 2 million guest hotels in the first half of 2020, growing 42 compared to 6% pre-pandemic. And we have successfully also hosted what I truly believe one of the best expos with more than 24 million visits, just as the world was trying to recover from COVID-19. And I think it is because of the foresight of our founding fathers. It is because of the preemptive investment decisions for our future readiness made us resilient as a government and as a nation, and helped us to recover from the COVID-19 even in a better shape. The Golden Jubilee also was a very important moment for us to reflect on how do we want to move forward and where do we want to go in the next 50 years. And through that process, the 10 principles of the 50, our 10 priorities for the next 50 was born. They are sort of a roadmap for us for the next 50 years, where we can build on our competitive advantage, but also grow into new sectors and strengthen our position as a global hub. But why is this important? Why is this 10 principles of the 50 is important? Why is this roadmap is important? Because the world is changing and changing fast. We are entering a new phase of geopolitical transformation and transition. We see a continuous rise in emerging markets, rapid urbanization, and hyper-connectivity between societies, between governments, and between political systems. Therefore, this uncertainty and this fast-paced change will create a lot of challenges, but also will create exciting opportunities. And we think these 10 principles of the 50 will help us do so and navigate our next journey of the next 50 years.
What are the projects of the 50 themselves? You answered the why, how it connects with the Golden Jubilee and the tradition in the UAE of being true to tradition and looking forward to the future with advanced planning. Tell us a little about the projects themselves. How do they fit with the overall strategic future planning in the UAE, which is focused, as I understand, on economic growth, diversification, powered by infrastructure, investment, trade, and talent, which you mentioned earlier?
So, Andrew, when we talk about future strategic planning, here we are planning for the next 50 years. And this is a long time frame that will create a lot of uncertainties, and it's really difficult to foresee the future with precision from now. But regardless of what the future holds, we need to start laying the foundation, just like our founding fathers laid the foundation 50 years ago for our future readiness and resilience. Now, we need to do so with the same spirit, drive, and determination. So the principles of the 50 are sort of the strategic blueprint. But to bring them into life, the UAE launched the projects of the 50. The projects of the 50 are practical projects in different domains. And the aim of these projects is to increase our readiness and our resilience for the future. And they cover so many areas. And if you allow me, Andrew, I would like to talk about the key among them. I think at the heart of the projects and the principles is our economic agenda. And the aim of our economic agenda is to create the best quality of life for people living in the UAE through creating a dynamic, sustainable economy and doubling our economy by 2030. And in doing so, we're focusing on different elements. I would like to share 3 elements with you. First, the economic partnerships. Our journey in the past 50 years were fueled by globalization, by partnerships, and by connection. And we would like to continue that and expand on that. So the UAE launched something called SIBA program, which is the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Program, where through this program, we try to open new markets, build a new strategic economic partnership, and solidify the positioning of the UAE as a global hub. So for example, we signed with India, and let me share with you a few numbers here. The agreement with India could boost the value of bilateral trade to over $100 billion within the next 5 years. We just recently signed with Indonesia, aiming to increase the non-oil bilateral trade from just $3 billion to $10 billion in the next 5 years. We have done so with Israel with the aim also of advancing bilateral trade beyond $10 million in the next 5 years. 5 new agreements are going to be signed soon under this program. So the economic partnerships is really important for us within our economic agenda. Second, industry. We are focusing on advanced manufacturing, creating the enabling environment for the industries of the future. Hence, one of the projects of the 50 is Operation 300 billion, which aims to increase the contribution of the industrial sector to our GDP from just 133 to 300 billion in the next 10 years. And the third element is creating new sectors. We know the future will be digital, so it's very important that we double down on our digital efforts. And just recently, the Cabinet has approved the digital economy strategy, aiming at increasing the contribution of the digital economy to 20% over the next 10 years. Also, we have established new entities to support and lead in the digital economy. So, for example, the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, which I think is a very unique authority to help us unlock the potential of the digital economy. I will move now to talent, because many of the projects of the 50 relates to talent. And why is talent important? Because this ambitious economic agenda requires talent. We know that the future, or the fuel for the future prosperity is talent. And we are working, Andrew, on two fronts: global talent and our national talent. When we talk about global talent, the aim is to attract and return the top talent in the world. And for that, the UAE have introduced new visa arrangements as part of the Project 50. So we have, for example, the cultural visa, which is aimed at attracting people from the creative industries. We have the digital nomad visa. We have the golden visa, which is the long term. We have the green visa for the knowledge workers. And because of these arrangements, the UAE ranks 6th globally in INSEAD Global Competitiveness Talent Index. We were also ranked the 1st in the region and the 5th globally out of 59 destinations in the best countries to attract talent to work and live in. But most importantly, Andrew, also working on our national talent, developing them, empower them with future skills. Youth is around 50% of our population between the age of 15 to 35. Therefore, education is very important for us. It is the cornerstone to support and help our human capital. Just recently, we had huge changes in the education sector, introducing young new ministers for education, early education, and public education, introducing new authorities to support. So we have a dedicated authority for early education because we know early education is very important. We have a dedicated authority for the quality and standards of education. Also, we have introduced Nafis. Nafis also is a program to help increase the participation of our national talent in the private sector, creating 75,000 jobs in the next 5 years with big investment and commitment from the government. Also, introducing a new school concept. We have something called Ajyal, which is the generation. Ajyal is generation in Arabic. It is schools, public schools operated by top private sector operators to be the pioneer in the education for future generations. And my third point about the projects of the 50 is the humanitarian aid. You know, since the inception of the UAE from 1971 till 2021, and I have the figures in front of me, the UAE provided more than 320 billion Emirati dirham in foreign aid to about 150 countries across the globe. We would like to continue to be a humanitarian force for good and peace in the region and the world. And when talking about humanitarian force, not just financially, but also from development perspective. And therefore, the UAE, as part of the Project 50, introduced something called the Government Experience Exchange Program. It's a platform for knowledge sharing among nations and countries when it comes to government modernization, because we believe in the UAE that a good governance, a good public administration is essential for the development in any country. And right now, we are working with 18 countries, including Oman, Egypt, Jordan, Uzbekistan, Serbia, Greece, Colombia, Costa Rica, in 45 areas of collaboration, delivering more than 24 million hours of capacity building worldwide. And lastly, climate change. Climate change is the most important agenda right now in the world, and part of our aspiration also for the next 50 is that we would like to be a leader in sustainable development. And the UAE was among the first countries to sign and ratify the COP21, the Paris Agreement, COP21. We have launched our national commitment to the net zero emissions by 2050. And we are working to host the COP28 in November 2023, where we would like to welcome the whole world together to come here in the UAE to take stock of the progress, but also discuss practical ways to make an impact and shift the challenges that we're facing in the climate change.
Tell us about, you mentioned this briefly, but if you could just give us a little further elaboration on the Nafis project, because this really caught my attention, and not only on your economic and future planning, but on UAE society, this incorporation of human capital into your planning to maintain and advance a competitive edge and for readiness and resilience needed for the future. This is something that seems inherent and central to your future planning.
So Andrew, you know, things are moving very fast, and the jobs of tomorrow will not be the jobs of today. There's a report for the World Economic Forum estimating that 85 million jobs will be replaced. At the same time, I think 97 million jobs will emerge. And I think for any government in the world, it's very important that we prepare the workforce for the jobs of tomorrow now. So I think Nafis is one of the projects that the UAE government is undertaking. It's very important for us to enhance the competitiveness of our national talent, make them ready for the future, make them resilient because things will change in the future, and also increase their participation in the private sector, because private sector is a major partner for our development in the UAE, and it represents a large stake of the economy. So it's very important also to increase the participation of our nationals in the private sector, and hence increase their contribution to the economy. The government has put a fund of around $6.5 billion to create 75,000 jobs for the Emirati talent in the private sector. But more than that also, Andrew, we have around 70 high education institutions in the UAE that graduates more than 28,000 graduates every year. We are focusing on creating qualified professionals, especially in the vital domains for us and for our development, such as renewable energy, nuclear energy, space, science, and AI. And actually, we have created a dedicated university, which is Mohammed bin Zayed AI University, which is, I think, a unique university in the world to help us support and prepare our Emirati talent for the jobs of the future.
Thank you, Minister. To remind our viewers that you can join the conversation by submitting a question via our Q&A function on Zoom. Let's turn to some questions that could bring in our participants, discussants today. Danny Sebright, you are at the nexus of American and Emirati business. The minister mentioned the role of the private sector. How do the private sector and business leaders in both countries, the United States and the UAE, see the opportunities in the UAE from the projects of the 50?
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for the opportunity to partner with Al-Monitor today. This is really wonderful opportunity, and Your Excellency, it's always great to be with you. Um, excuse me. American and Emirati businesses see what's happening with the projects of the 50 as a doubling down on a number of reforms that started a few years ago to make the UAE more business friendly, to make it more accepting and more tolerant, more welcoming. And what's happening now with the projects of the 50 is just this showcase of how an American company can come and partner with an Emirati company for the future, live, work, raise a family in the UAE, and not only access. We talked about the free trade agreements, which I think Afshin will touch on a bit, but not only access a market in the UAE and the immediate Gulf, but with these amazing new free trade agreements and opportunities to access markets all throughout the broader region, and to become a global hub for sure for the future. The projects of the 50 are not just business-friendly reforms, economic reforms, but they're social reforms as well. And they're all taken in their totality and together of trying to catapult the UAE to be a leading global hub like Singapore, like Korea, like Paris or London for the future. And we applaud it. Our American companies are excited about it. Our Emirati companies are excited about it. And they are working more and more and doubling down on the opportunities that this presents to them for the future.
Thank you. Afshin, you have written extensively on innovation and integration in the UAE and its role and growing role as a hub in the region. How do you see the projects of the 50 fitting into these broader trends?
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for this opportunity as well. It's always great to see Danny and Her Excellency as well. So let me just start with this. Whenever you visit, say, for example, a government office in the UAE, you often see these before and after pictures on the wall. You probably all have seen them, and maybe your listeners are familiar with them. And the before pictures are from not long ago. The before pictures are from the early 1980s, frankly, and they are pictures of Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai, with maybe 3 or 4 buildings and a lot of dust and dirt, and then you see these after pictures, and you see these these Manhattan style skyline, in Dubai, and you see before and after pictures like that in Abu Dhabi. And what we've seen with those pictures is the physical manifestation of the transformation of this small country. Let's not forget, this is a small country that has transformed itself over these 50 years, right? But the before and after pictures are not only in the UAE, although they are more dramatic in the UAE, they're also before and after pictures in China, in India, large parts of the Middle East and Africa, where we've seen this kind of transformation beginning to take place. But the pictures that you can't see are the ones that Her Excellency was talking about. The human capital development, the education levels and educational attainment, women's empowerment and women's education. Those are not easily depicted on a wall in a before and after picture, but quietly, regulations and innovation and creating ecosystems for innovation. But quietly, the UAE has been doing this. And this is why we are, we see the UAE where it is today. And I think the two key words that both Danny used this term doubling down, and Her Excellency used this term accelerating. So what we're seeing is the UAE saying, okay, we've had this success over the past 50 years, but we're not going to rest on our laurels, and we're going to double down, and we're going to accelerate. And a good example is these trade agreements. The UAE, with 0.13% of the world's population, already accounts for about 1.5% of world trade, according to my numbers that I've done on my research, about 2.4% of the world sea container trade. Anybody would say this is a country punching above its weight. It's already a robust trade relationship with India, about $60 billion. But then they've doubled down and accelerated, to use the language that is used among my colleagues. And now they're aiming for $100 billion. So I see this as a country that understands that you can't sit still. The world of nations is highly competitive. There are nations that want to be the next UAE. They want to, take aspects of what the UAE is doing or take some market share away from the UAE. And you can't sit still in that kind of environment. And that's how I see the projects of the 50.
Afshin, thank you very much. Again, please submit your questions via the Q&A function. We already have a number of questions in the queue. Your Excellency, I'd like to start with a question about the UAE space program. This is also, as I understand, part of the projects of the 50. It's got an ambitious timetable. I'd also note that the program includes, and you've alluded to these themes in your future planning, both international partnerships, including with the United States, and it's also multi-generational in its focus. It includes an approach to STEM education over the next 50 years. Could you talk a little about the space program and its wider applications in terms of the education system?
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just take you back 46 years ago. Our ambition to space started 46 years ago when our late Sheikh Zayed, our founding father, met 3 Apollo 17 astronauts in 1976. And in that meeting, he was presented with a model of the US ship. So the aspiration started long time ago. But then the realization of it happened with the landing of the Hope probe on the red planet in 2021, making the UAE the 5th global nation to reach the red planet. Our aim is to be a leader in the space sector. And this is very important for us, for our economic agenda and for our diversification. Because through the space sector, we are building, Andrew, a strong STEM foundation, as you said, with young Emirati engineers, scientists. We are pushing the research and development agenda. We are developing technologies. So therefore, space sector is a new sector, is vital for our diversification and our new economic agenda. And the government, for example, has a fund of around, I think I have the numbers here, $820 million to support the startups in this sector, also finance research and development, and develop technology. We have also a couple of projects in the space sectors going on as part of the Project 50. And please forgive me, I'm not the expert in space in technical terms, so I try to explain them in simple terms as I understand them. We have something called SERB. SERB is a series of advanced satellites aiming at progressing the environmental monitoring and analysis. It provides solutions for the climate change, for environmental sustainability and disaster management. We have also the lunar mission operated by Rashid rover, and it is designed right now by Emirati scientists and engineers. And then we have the interplanetary mission, which is part of the Project 50. I think it is designed to launch in 2028. It involves the expedition to the orbit Venus. So we went to Mars, now to Venus. You know the book of Venus and Mars. So we're going to both planets, and followed with an expedition of the asteroid belt beyond Mars, with, of course, strong partnership from the private sector, but also global partnerships. So, for example, the UAE was among the first countries to sign NASA Artemis Accords. Also, last week, our President, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, announced that Abu Dhabi will host the Abu Dhabi Space Debate. It's a global forum that will bring policymakers, that will bring business leaders to discuss the challenges of the global space sector and try to propose solutions or global policies to address these challenges. So, space sector is key part of the Project of the 50 because it lays also the foundation for the new economic sectors that we aspire for.
Your Excellency, there was a question here when we've been talking a great bit about the UAE is a hub for integration and innovation in the region. Does the UAE see itself as drawing on both East and West in its future planning?
Andrew, partnerships was very crucial for us in the past 50 years. And going forward, partnerships is key. So our aim is to develop strategic partnerships with new markets all around the world in various sectors, and having a balanced agenda with both the West and the East.
A related question, Danny had mentioned Singapore and Korea. Are those countries considered as models in your planning? And how does where does the UAE look in terms of thinking about the future, in terms of the success of other countries?
So, Andrew, this question is for me, for Danny.
I was asking you, Minister. My apologies.
I think every country is unique. We have done a lot of benchmarking during the past 50 years, but going forward, I think maybe we need to develop our own unique model that will fit the local context, the aspiration also of us as a nation. As I told you, like, everyone is unique. Every nation has its own strength that we can learn from. And through the government exchange program, we are learning also from the many nations that we are working with.
Good. In fact, we did have a question that I was going to ask next about the government exchange program. So that's been quite a success for the UAE.
Exactly. We started this program maybe 2 years ago, and the aim is that we would like to support other nations in their development journey. Good governance, public administration is very important. And throughout the years, we have developed practices that we think might be useful for other countries, but also we are eager to learn from other countries. So, for example, we're working with Egypt in improving services to citizens. We're working with Uzbekistan on improving the business environment and laws and regulations. We are working with other countries depending on their priorities, and we're really happy to share our knowledge, but also learn from them. Also, we have, maybe, Andrew, it's important here to mention that we host a global forum called World Government Summit every year in Dubai. And the aim of this summit is to prepare governments for the future, including the UAE government. And we bring governments from all around the world. We'll be happy also to host, maybe host some of your audience here as part of the World Government Summit, because we bring private sector, academia, government officials to talk about the future. How can the government build a better future for their people?
Danny, a question for you. The minister spoke about a fairly progressive visa program that has been used to attract talent. What has been the experience of the private sector in terms of the visa program and bringing talent into the UAE and the ability to do business in the UAE?
Well, thanks, Andrew. The visa issue has worked out incredibly well for a lot of American companies, and attracting talent to a foreign country. One key tenet of that is that you can come and understand that you have a set amount of time to stay, and that the renewal of your process to stay and do your work, especially when it comes to research and innovation, research and development innovation, it's really important to understand that there's a surety of your status. And the Emiratis have rolled out something called the Golden Visa. They've done a really amazing job of approaching many American company executives and asking them, inviting them to apply for the Golden Visa, have access to it. This is a 10-year visa. I've been involved in referring a lot of American executives from the US-UAE Business Council membership to this program, and very welcoming and forward-leaning in this regard. Very important and a very key component of this overall Projects of the 50 reform process.
We also have a question about the UAE Railway system, and which is also part of the projects of the 50. And Minister, if it's okay, I'd like to have Afshin address this because he's written about this for Al-Monitor.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think what we're going to see, and I'd love to hear what the minister has to say, but I think if we were to fast forward to 10 years from now, 15 years from now, it will be very common in the UAE to be riding trains, from place to place. It's not it's not common now at all. The UAE really set themselves up as a major aviation hub. In 2014, as you know, Dubai International Airport surpassed London Heathrow as the busiest international air hub in the world. The pandemic certainly knocked back the numbers, but they're well on their way to reclaiming that top spot. And so whether it's aviation and shipping and the railways seems to me to be the piece that was missing. And it was the piece that was missing across the GCC. And I think what we're writing together next, Andrew, is this piece about how there's a railways revolution taking place in the GCC, certainly in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And I think we're going to see 10 years from now, 15 years from now, riding rail is going to be very common in the UAE and in 2 or 3 of the countries in the region. I think some of the other countries are lagging behind.
Your Excellency, any comment on the rail system? Because we've been talking about the space program and the hub for air travel, but this vision of a rail network is something that we don't often think about when it comes to the UAE and the Gulf.
I think it's a really interesting project in the transport and logistics sector, which is a sector that we are strong in, but we would like also to push the boundaries and frontiers and have new modes of transport. The UAE is really famous for moving goods and moving people. So I think the train is a really important project of the 50, but also we are experimenting and we'd like to use advanced technology in our transport system. So for example, we have the Hyperloop project in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, transporting people and goods in a very short time. So I think it fits well within the new development plan of the UAE.
Andrew, could I interject just one point? 10 years ago, when the rail project was getting its feet off the ground in the UAE, the Business Council was approached by the then CEO to help take him around the country in the United States and visit all of American railways that were considered best in class and do a study of them, a survey of them. The same, I've taken multiple delegations to visit Hyperloop and some of the other high-speed rail technologies in the United States. So as always, the UAE is committed to reaching out, finding the best-in-class technologies that are out there, and then building on them and improving upon them for the betterment of their society and the broader region. And Etihad Rail, I think, is in fact visiting the United States again very soon to do a similar sort of catch-up on what's going on our rail system. And I see all of this as very, very positive and, importantly, a lot of opportunity for American business.
Excellent. Your Excellency, a question here consistent with the UAE commitment to sustainability and climate. Can you discuss the efforts and plans to make use of solar energy within the context of these challenges?
I think the UAE was a pioneer in solar energy many years ago with the establishment of Masdar, which was the first sustainable city in the UAE. And since then, we have made a huge progress to develop solar energies, renewable energies in general. There we have a target of having 24% of our energy mix as renewable, whether it's nuclear or solar energy. And now with the progressive climate change agenda worldwide, we would like to contribute to that and be a future leader when it comes to climate change by also supporting other nations when it comes to solar energy and the experience and the knowledge that we had.
Your Excellency, a question you've talked about at great length today about the priority of youth in the United Arab Emirates and the attention that's given to the education system. What are you finding about the broader changes in education? You talked about and university committed directly to artificial intelligence. How is the UAE system and society responding to these efforts to keep that competitiveness and plan for a future where, as you said, the jobs of today will not be the jobs of tomorrow?
I think education, Andrew, is a cornerstone for the development for the next 50 years because things are moving very fast. And we need to prepare the talent, the youth, the young people for a very different future. So I think part of the priorities that we have in the education system, first focusing on the early education, because we know that the first 5 years is really crucial in the life of a child. Also balancing the AI, science, technology, curriculum and skills with the art humanities, because we want well-rounded students. And also there's an effort to make the youth aware of the possible opportunities in the future and try to align the majors that we have in the university with the future demand that we think that we will have in the future. So education is very important. Youth agenda is very important for us. We have our colleague, Her Excellency Sham Al-Mazroui, a young, competent minister leading this agenda. And the agenda involves empowering the youth, giving them voice, and giving them opportunity also to shape our future policies, because they know better than us. They will live in this future. So giving them a voice, giving them representation, but more importantly, making them a key part of decision-making in the UAE.
Your Excellency, we are running out of time, although I feel we're just getting started given the future planning agenda. One final question, if I may, and the others may want to comment on it too. A question on the UAE, which seems to be a thriving environment for tech startups. Could you tell us about how encouraging that environment so that entrepreneurs and investors from the UAE and throughout the region can come to the UAE and develop and build on their ideas?
Digital economy is very important for us in the UAE. Therefore, the UAE has introduced the visa scheme, special visa schemes for startups in technology, different funds to support also these startups, the virtual asset authority to help regulate also this new concept of the new digital assets that we're saying. So I think the UAE is really committed to support the startups in technology, whether it's in GovTech, whether it's in sustainability, because we know also having a successful ecosystem is important to attract the startups. So regulations, fund, support, incubators. We are working on a comprehensive ecosystem to support the startups in technology.
Andrew, the startup sector in technology is just critical, not just for technology in its own right, but for every other business vertical. Whether it's oil and gas and energy, whether it's finance, all of these verticals require the latest and greatest innovation in tech. And the UAE is creating, as the minister said, this ecosystem for them all to come and thrive and do original research and development and create original IP for the first time in the world, in the UAE.
And Andrew, if you go back to one of the minister's earlier comments and one of your questions about East and West, there is a unique confluence of talent that has converged around the UAE. So when you do have a startup, they often say that you can have your startup in Cairo or Amman or elsewhere, but when you want to scale up, you often find yourself going into the UAE. And we've seen that. We've seen it with companies that have been successful. Obviously, the ones that everybody knows about are Careem, the ride-hailing company, Souk.com and others. But there's the new Careems and there's the new Souk.coms that are not in the retail tech space, but are in some of the spaces that Her Excellency talked about. So I think that the ecosystem, the talent, and then you have this unique combination of where the UAE is a 4-hour flight, to 1/3 of the world, and an 8-hour flight to 2/3 of the world, and so you have this. We often think of it in terms of the Middle East, but it's very much a part of. It's a nexus of Asia and Africa. And the Middle East, and so I think that that's a very important point when it comes to the tech startups as well.
Good. Well, our time has come to a close. Your Excellency, can I give you
just to comment on Afshin's points? I think the regulatory environment is very important. Therefore, we establish sandboxes in the UAE to support the technology startups. So we have the Regulab that can provide licenses for new startups in a very new technologies. We have also the FinTech sandbox in Dubai Financial Center, and we have Hub 71 in Abu Dhabi. So all these incubators / sandboxes provide also the legal coverage for the new technologies that need licensing that might not be normal to the normal economic licenses.
Very good. Thank you. I would like to thank our discussants, Danny Sebright, President of the US-UAE Business Council, our co-sponsor today. And thank you, Danny, for you and your organization and putting this together. Afshin Molavi of the Johns Hopkins University Center School of Advanced International Studies and a regular contributor to Al-Monitor Pro, and especially our guest today, Her Excellency Ohood Al Roumi. Thank you for talking to us about all the exciting things that are happening in the UAE. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you all for participating in our program.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone.